Let's get the dogs in here. Hold on a minute.
Hey, David, can you bring a horse in there?
I beg your pardon?
Honest to God. Anyway, we're talking with Endless Summer Quarterly's David Beard once again on the program. David, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
And if anyone heard our little banter there right before we began this interview, you know that we're talking about Pet Sounds, but this conversation is not an album review of Pet Sounds. That's coming. This is, we'll call it the path to Pet Sounds. And I think it starts with the Wrecking Crew, does it not?
Certainly in part it does.
Yeah.
Brian had made the conscious decision to stop touring after he suffered from a mental breakdown in December of '64.
Right.
So Glenn Campbell initially took over on the road, but Glenn Campbell would go on to be Glenn Campbell. That's the short version of that story.
Right, exactly.
And Bruce joined and eventually became a full-time member of the touring group by May of '65. And was then in the studio with the Beach Boys recording on their Summer Days and Summer Nights album. And everybody knows California Girls and knows that famous answering chorus at the end of the song that
Right.
his voice is so prominently featured in. But he's all over that album. But because the Beach Boys were on the road touring, Brian was at home and he needed something to kind of keep up with his ideas. He was just recording all the time with musicians who were available to meet him in the studio to record his ideas. And those people are basically who we know today as the Wrecking Crew. And so you're talking about Hal Blaine, Carol Kay, Mike Melvoin, Julius Vector, Tommy Tedesco,
Right.
Billy Strange, Buddy Collette, Don Randy, Al DeLore, Mike Deasy, Frank Capp. I mean, the list, Lyle Ritz, Plaz Johnson, Barney Kessel, Larry Knechtel. The list goes on and on and on. And some of these names we know because, like Larry Knechtel, he went on to Bread.
Sure. We should also say that these are musicians who played on some of Brian's personal favorite records.
Yes, but it wasn't as though they were all there each time, so that's not the case. It was whoever was available would show up, and they were all kind of a part of the union. And they were called the Wrecking Crew because it was kind of viewed that they were so good at what they did. They made the bands whose records they were playing on they put them to shame because they were experts, they were professionals,
Right.
and they did it so well that they were wrecking the music industry. But, hey, when you look at the songs that these people played on, you get it. You're talking about Be My Baby by the Ronettes. You're talking about This Diamond Ring by Gary Lewis and the Playboys. Mr. Tambourine Man by the Byrds.
Yep.
California Dreamin' by the Mamas and Papas. Dizzy by Tommy Rowe. I mean, Eva Destruction, Barry McGuire.
Yeah.
On and on and on and on. These are real important musicians, and Glenn Campbell was one of them. And in some cases, Carl Wilson often played 12-string guitar when he was not on the road, when he was there listening to tracks. The studio at Western 3 was so crowded with musicians, Carl would often have to come in the booth and plug his guitar in there because there was no space.
Right. So the Summer Days and Summer Nights album comes out July 5th, 1965. And by the fall, Brian's already working on tracks that would eventually become the Pet Sounds album. That album wouldn't be released until the following year. But in between that time, there's another Beach Boys release.
The Party album.
Yeah.
Until recently, I've always enjoyed the Party album for being what it is, which is a stopgap recording to buy the Beach Boys more time.
Yeah.
And with the release of last year, I think we've already talked about the album on your previous show, but the Beach Boys Uncovered and Unplugged is, for me, like Let It Be Naked. It's like you're allowed to be there, the fly on the wall, and just really enjoy them interacting with one another. And so you've got all 6 members in there. You've got Brian, who now was the homebody, who is creating the tracks, and you have the touring band at home too. And they're all there together hanging. And you get that relationship. It's really important. It's really important to the Beach Boys catalog. It's really important to their history to really dig in to that release, because I can't get enough of it. I think it speaks volumes about the relationships about that time, and we're going to talk about Caroline No, and it's important to mention it now. The relationships were solid.
Yeah.
And you can hear that. You can hear them having fun. You can also hear them working hard. And it's clear to me that their success was not just due in part to the great things that Brian was creating in the studio, but their success was by Mike, Carl, Dennis, Al, and Bruce taking that product on the road and performing it for people, and performing it well.
We're discussing the path to pet sounds today on the Vintage Rockin' Pop Shop with our guest, our frequent guest, David Beard, editor of Endless Summer Quarterly magazine. Now, David, when we left off, we were talking about the Party album.
Right. So you have the Beach Boys in the studio together over the course of what I think is just over a month. It's from August to late September, and they record enough for what becomes the Party album. And it's interesting to me to note that the Beach Boys did not ever plan on releasing a Barbara Ann single. That was never a part of the Party album plan or anything. They recorded the Party album just to buy themselves more time, and radio stations were playing Barbara Ann, which is the last cut on the album. They were playing that cut off the LP. And that album was released on November 8th. 2 weeks later, November 22nd, out comes a brand new single by the Beach Boys called The Little Girl I Once Knew. And the music is kind of along the lines of where the Summer Days album left off, but there's a whole new dramatic thing going on. You know, I can't remember where it's been brought up, but somewhere someone had asked the question, does The Little Girl I Once Knew sound incomplete to you? Because of the stop gaps in it, the Look Out Babe and Splitman. And I suppose Brian could have done something else there.
Well, he could have added feet stomping to keep the beat going like a Four Seasons record, but no, it had
I can't imagine it any other way.
I think it had to be deliberate.
Yeah. I mean, why else would you do it? Why else would you have those words there?
Yeah, and it turned out to be a mistake on a commercial level. Because
that's right. It went to number 20.
Yeah.
Would it have gone higher if the stop gaps weren't there?
Well, I mean,
maybe.
I guess if you're at a dance club and you're dancing to it, which I imagine most teenagers were doing to Beach Boys records at that time, and then you hit that pause, what do you do there? You know, you sort of lose the rhythm, and I guess you stare at your partner and wait for the song to come back on.
If you really listen to that song, and I mean really, really dig in, when Mike Love comes and he goes, "Look out, babe."
Right.
If you really visualize that song, he's standing right next to the girl, he's looking deep in her eyes, and it's like, you know, it's go time.
Yeah.
It's you and me. Then the other part, the split man.
Yeah.
That's like where he turns around, he puts his arm out to protect the girl, and he's looking at the guy, and he's pointing at him, and he's playing split man. And that dramatic pause is to let it sink in. It's that moment in time where it's like, what's going to happen next? That song it has feels of Heroes and Villains. It has feels of Cabanescence. And it points to Good Vibrations. That song, even though it was done in short order, because it's not one of those longer tracks that Brian messed around with. He didn't spend much time on it at all. They knocked that out fairly quickly. So Brian was very capable in late 65 of putting together something quickly and still advancing musically.
Well, let's hear a little bit of Brian Wilson in the studio directing the Wrecking Crew during the sessions for The Little Girl I Once Knew, and then we'll segue into an alternate stereo version of that song. The Beach Boys with an alternate version of The Little Girl I Once Knew. Around the time of that release, John Lennon gave an interview where he raved about this song. In fact, he said, and I quote, "This is the greatest. Turn it up. Turn it right up. It's got to be a hit. It's the greatest record I've heard for weeks. It's fantastic. I hope it will be a hit. It's all Brian Wilson. He just uses the voices as instruments. He never tours or anything." Boy, that put an idea in his head, didn't it?
It sure did.
He just sits at home thinking up fantastic arrangements out of his head. Doesn't even read music. You keep waiting for the fabulous breaks. Great arrangement. It goes on and on with all different things. I hope it's a hit so I can hear it all the time.
Wow. Yeah. And then, I'll have to talk about that when we do our Pet Sounds discussion, when we get into Pet Sounds, Bruce going to London and playing the album for them on a little record player at the Waldorf. That's a story in itself.
Well, I'll tell you what. We'll continue this conversation with Endless Summer Quarterly's David Beard right after this charming retromercial.
WFDU FM.
We're talking to good friend of the show, David Beard, editor of Endless Summer Quarterly magazine, about the path to Pet Sounds, taking a look at the Beach Boys and their work in late 65 into early 1966. Now, we just heard Barbara Ann, and if I have the timeline correct, the single, The Little Girl I Once Knew, came out November 22nd and did okay, not great by Beach Boys standards, but then on December 20th, Capitol releases Barbara Ann, and the Beach Boys had nothing to do with that release. They obviously were pushing The Little Girl I Once Knew, so in a way, it looks as if Capitol sort of undercut the Beach Boys.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Well, and it won't be the first time they undercut something.
Right.
But and historically within a year's time.
Yeah.
But you understand from the marketing standpoint, radio stations are taking the party LP that have been shipped to their stations, and keep in mind, album format didn't happen until the 70s. You didn't play albums. So they're playing Barbara Ann, and they're asking Capitol Records, don't you have a 45 of this song? And to their credit, they got it out before the year's end. And going into January, the beginning of January 66 is when The Little Girl I Once Knew finally peaked at 20, and that's when Barbara Ann entered the charts. And in February, Barbara Ann finally peaked and became the bigger selling single. But, okay, so now we're in February, and I don't know how you want to segue here.
Well, we're going to get into this in depth when we discuss the actual album Pet Sounds, but in a nutshell, Brian hears the Beatles album Rubber Soul and notices that the LP, and keep in mind that he's listening to the American configuration of Rubber Soul, he notices that it has sort of a folk rock feel, it's introspective, there's a cohesiveness to it.
Right.
And he decides he's up to the challenge, and he's going to craft a series of songs that explore his own hopes and fears and desires and an introspective song cycle in a way, and he enlists the help of lyricist and jingle writer Tony Asher.
Yes.
And that's a canny move. I don't know if Brian did it consciously, but a jingle writer has to make sure that the original intent of the product or service that he's writing for is coherent and makes a statement that's relatable to everyone.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, making an impact.
When I think about Brian's songwriting partner choices, from my perspective, it's about timing and him being comfortable. Tony, and I'm not sure how they met or who they met through. It's something I should know, but I can't recall it. They created something good, and I think a lot of it has to do with Tony being able to relate to the subject matter. If Tony can't relate to the things that Brian wants to write about, then Tony isn't the main collaborator on that album.
Well, didn't they get together beforehand and have long conversations about first love and heartache and, well, the kind of things that young men who were becoming fast friends would talk about? That's
right. And This is interesting to me. In 2005, when I did a video interview with Tony Asher, I asked him, is it accurate to say that because you're the lyricist on these songs, you know, we know the music came from Brian and some of the lyrics came from Brian, but because you're the main lyricist on this album, when we listen to Pet Sounds, we actually know Tony Asher too? And he said, nobody's ever asked me that before. That's in 2005. That's insane to me.
Yeah, it's his story too.
It is his story. Absolutely. And he had the Beach Boys singing it. So Pet Sounds is so much more than we know. There's so much to that. It's a really beautiful canvas. You know, there's moments on it that are sad, and there's And speaking of that, we should talk about the first single that came from this collection, and that was Caroline No.
And at the time, no one knew what Pet Sounds was going to become. Nobody knew that the album really was in process. So this is the first time anyone had heard anything from those sessions, and it's not released as a Beach Boys single.
No, it came out as a Brian Wilson solo single.
I'm still confused.
Well, here we go. We've talked about Little Girl I Once Knew, then Barbara Ann. So here you got Barbara Ann going into 1966. That is the most fun in the sun, good time, you name it,
right,
striped shirt association with the Beach Boys image as you can find. And it easily points back 2 years to the work they did in 64, the Shutdown Volume 2 album, the All Summer Long album. Right. It points back to that image. It points back to the Summer Days album, and in a great way. It's perfect, and that's why it becomes the big hit that it became. Now, here's the next thing to follow that is a Brian Wilson solo record, and it's Caroline No. This is a sweet, achingly beautiful recording, and the Beach Boys would tell you this, that had no business with any of their voices on it, because Brian's was all you needed. They'll all tell you that. And if any of you listeners have the 1997 box set, there's a couple of Caroline No radio promos on there. All the Beach Boys were there in the studio doing Caroline No promotional radio spots in support of Brian's solo 45 release, which was released on March 7th, 1966. On the backside was Summer Means New Love, which was the instrumental from the Summer Days album. So it was perfect. I mean, the tone of both of those songs were very compatible. And when you listen to the box set from 97, or the new one that'll come out on June 10th, there's some radio spots on there, you're going to hear the support. There is no other story there in terms of the Beach Boys not being in support of Brian. The group certainly by this time had some tension, but again, all the more reason I was emphasizing the importance of listening to the Party album Uncovered and Unplugged sessions that were released just in 2015, because they really give you the Beach Boys. If there was an eyebrow raised about Brian putting out a single with just his name on it, the eyebrow was in the air for all of 2 seconds. In talking with Mike Love and Bruce Johnston in my recent interviews that I did with them in February, Bruce was the first one to say, we had no business singing on that.
A Brian Wilson solo song, at least for the time being in March of 1966, because it would eventually wind up on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds album. And, David, this set a precedent because just a year later, there was a Brian Wilson and Mike Love single, Getting Hungry.
Yeah,
it would happen again.
I don't know. Boy, that's a whole nother guessing, man. That one has more mystery around it than I know what to do with. But that's something I will uncover next year. I can rest assure you.
You know, I'm glad we're covering these two songs today, Caroline No, and then earlier we talked about The Little Girl I Once Knew, because when you think about it, both of those songs are about the same subject matter.
Right. Little Girl I Once Knew, you're right. It's like, hey, things are changing.
Yeah, and isn't it great? Caroline No is, oh no, things have changed and I don't like it.
Oh, boy.
So I always thought it was interesting. These two songs, very different presentation, but essentially the same text.
Well, yes, and I know we've talked long, but part of the story to me, without even getting into Pet Sounds, is Sloop John B. Because Sloop John B started during the Summer Day sessions.
Right.
And that's your carryover. That's like if you're got a bookend to the whole story that precedes the Pet Sounds album. A is the Party album. Z is Sloop John B. Or A could even be California Girls or the Summer Days album, because Sloop John B started during that album. Bruce, again, as recent as February, just as much as Al thinks Good Vibes should be on Pet Sounds, Bruce still believes that Sloop John B should have been on Summer Days. That's how it feels to them.
Right.
They were working on Sloop John B, leading up to the Party album. They did the Party thing, got it out of the way, went back to Sloop John B, knocked out The Little Girl I Once Knew, continued to work on now what would become Pet Sounds tracks, Caroline No being one of them, continual work on Sloop John B. And by December, Brian pretty much has Sloop John B in the can. This is December.
Right.
And the Beach Boys, January, have their first tour of Japan. So they're overseas. And while they're overseas, they have a reception of a party because it's a big deal. If anybody has the Pet Sounds album, if you look at the back of the Pet Sounds album, you see several pictures of the Beach Boys in
kimonos and
kimonos and getting
samurai outfits.
yes. And while they were over there, January 7th through the 23rd of 1966. Bruce told me that while they were in Japan, Brian sent them a physical acetate of his final mix for Sloop. This is January.
Right.
And they listened to his final mix for the very first time at a press party in Tokyo hosted by Toshiba Musical Industries, which were the Japanese label that distributed to Capitol Records in Japan. And that was the first time they heard it. And Bruce kind of remarked about what really got his attention was because when they recorded Sloop John B, the dropout wasn't there, where it just goes a cappella.
Oh, okay.
That wasn't there. So the final mix where Brian took that out and it went a cappella, Bruce said it just changed the whole complexion of the song. It just made it so much better.
A song inspired by the Kingston Trio classic, The Wreck of the John B. Al Jardine was a big fan, suggested to Brian that the Beach Boys record that song, and of course they made it a classic. Our guest today is David Beard, editor of Endless Summer Quarterly magazine. And David, as we start to wrap up, the latest issue of Endless Summer Quarterly deals with some of the things we've been talking about today. You interviewed the actors who portrayed the Wrecking Crew in the Brian Wilson biopic, Love and Mercy, and that was an interesting article. It really was.
Yes. Just great to have a musician's perspective who actually played that instrument talking about recreating the Pet Sound sessions for the camera in the film Love and Mercy. And it's a fascinating insight. It really does make you appreciate the original Wrecking Crew that much more for what they were able to do back in 1966.
Absolutely.
And then the upcoming issue is going to be a 50th anniversary celebration of the Pet Sounds album. And great thing right now, Brian Wilson's already been out on the road, and he's going to continue his extensive tour this year celebrating the 50th anniversary of Pet Sounds 50. And he's got Al Jardine on the road with him. He's got Al's son, Matt Jardine, with him. Blondie Chaplin is there. Right. And they're really doing, it's a group of incredible musicians who, on the average, can play 4 or 5 instruments apiece. And, all impressive guys. And they have so much love for Brian that it just really, it makes, you can go see Brian perform the entire Pet Sounds album live, and it's pretty worthwhile to see that. So that's happening, and just go to brianwilson.com for that. And then go to thebeachboys.com to find out what Mike Love and Bruce Johnston are doing and touring with the Beach Boys name, and what I believe is going to be called 50 Years of Good Vibrations. I believe that tour is going to be hard and heavy in the beginning of June of this year.
Right.
But so people should just go to thebeachboys.com or to Mike Love's Facebook page and just follow the dates. There's going to be a lot of dates and a lot of really cool special things happening on that tour. The next issue of ESQ, beyond the Pet Sounds issue, where I'll have exclusive interviews, as always, it's what I do, with Mike Love and Bruce Johnston, probably more, and lots of quotes. I'm going to be pulling together, I'm going to spend some invested time pulling together historic quotes from all the members of the group and kind of put them in one place together. So it's going to be all that. It's going to be really, really done with, as always, but Pet Sounds is a really special album, so I'll be doing it with a lot of love. And, I'll be really approaching it with my usual passion, but certainly with care and love, because I just, this music has done so much for me in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, my God, I'm so appreciative of it. So it's my goal to make that show in my work. And then in the fall, the template's been laid, the foundation is there, but the fall issue is certainly going to be 50 Years of Good Vibrations. It's
Right.
going to be a celebration of that song. And that I can say very matter-of-factly. So that's really the next upcoming 2 issues of ESQ. There will be more to tell the next time we speak.
So, the big question is, where can people go if they want to find out about ESQ, how they can get it, where they can get it, all that good stuff?
The easiest way is to go to the Facebook page. Just go to Facebook and type in Endless Summer Quarterly. Or, if you're not a Facebook person, you can just go to esquarterly.com.
It's always great to have you on, and I look forward to delving deeper into the Pet Sounds album and the Pet Sounds sessions. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for having me on. Look forward to it.